the resistance and assistance, but also the ability to pre-test, post-test, but not even pre and post. It's pre, during, and post. The 1080 sprint here is almost everything that you can do with this amazing piece of technology. As a 1080 sprint user for over 3 years, here are my experiments, trials, errors over that time frame. And hopefully by the end of this episode / video, you can better wrap your head around all of the things, just scratching the surface, that this amazing piece of technology can do. So basically, I'm going to go over all the different uses, why I do it like that, how I actually do it in real life, as well as some pictures, videos, and visuals of that use. So the slogan of 1080 Sprint, testing is training and training is testing, I think does an awesome job in summarizing what this awesome piece of technology does. So not only is it super smooth resistance, assistance, it's repeatable, but it can track literally, I guess, almost everything of every rep, and you can track that over time. So it's not only just a good training stimulus, the resistance and assistance, but also the ability to pre-test, post-test, but not even pre and post. It's pre, during, and post. And here's an example of just the extensiveness or the depth of a force velocity profile. It spits out, what was that, 10 metrics plus all of the time metrics of a sprint, which at the end of the day, you have to get from A to B faster. But testing is training, training is testing, not only pre-test, post-test, but pre, during, and post-test. So first, resisted sprints. This is what people think of the 1080 sprint the most for, and admittedly, that's what we use it the most for as well. But not to overstate how smooth, how consistent, how repeatable. When you set 10 kgs, 15.3 kgs, when you get all the way up to 30 kgs, it is the same every single time. It is super smooth, and it aids and it enhances the rep that you're doing because it's not jerky. It's not all over the place, making the athlete off balance. But load velocity profiling, or basically an athlete's ability to run against a variety of loads, we use mainly to individualize our speed training. So for example, in the weight room, you wouldn't have everyone just put the same percent body weight on the bar because it doesn't take into account how strong they are. In lifting, you would prescribe a velocity zone so each athlete can pick the right weight based on how strong they are and how heavy they are, and all things considered, to get them the most appropriate weight on the bar for that speed. So same thing with load velocity profiling. We use velocity decrements, or what percent slower the resistance makes you. And that way, each athlete gets the appropriate resistance for them to achieve that velocity decrement. So here I have a printout or a screenshot that I then print out of every athlete we train and their load velocity profile. So if we're doing 10% velocity decrement that day, they go on the wall, they look at what their kilogram or resistance number is. The first 5 athletes, 3.4, 3, 3, 5.2, 3.3. They walk up to me before they do the rep. They say what the number is. I put that resistance on the machine, and each athlete is getting individualized resistance for what they need for that velocity decrement. Next, we have force velocity profiling, which I showed in the previous slide, which does things like force per kg, max velocity, power per kg, RF max, or your ratio of force at the beginning of the sprint. How horizontal versus vertical is basically your first step. And your decreased ratio of force, or basically how fast or slow you rise as you accelerate, which is a little bit more in depth. And all that takes is one sprint to do that. And next is the graph / coaching with it. So what I think timing lasers, or what I know timing lasers miss, is that it's simply just what you do. It is your time A to time B, but that doesn't describe how you run. So the graph on the 1080 sprint, which I'll have in the next slide, we use mostly as a speed over distance curve, but the mountains are every step that the athlete runs, and that is how they run. So that aids in me coaching because I combine what I see, what the athlete feels, and what the data the graph says to put it all together to pick the right coaching cues, the right just coaching in general moving forwards. So first, I have a video of an athlete doing a 50%, or actually for this, what is he, 6'5", 230 receiver in the CFL I don't think 30 kilograms is enough to truly get 50%, but it's as heavy as the machine goes. And just to get something that is challenging, that is consistent, repeatable, and trackable as our super heavy resisted sprints, it's not a jerky sled. You don't have to try to figure out the friction of the turf, which does affect the resistance of a sled. And it is a good challenge. It's repeatable, it's consistent. So that is the super heavy, for example. The next video, I have us profiling, my boss and I, force velocity profiling and an entire Power 5 football team. Super simple. We had 2 1080 sprints, ours and theirs. I took the skills and mid skills. The other guy took the bigs. They each got 2 reps, a 30-yard sprint for the skills and mid skills, a 20 for the bigs. Undo the belt, it shoots back. The next guy hops up. These were in groups of 5 to 13 athletes. They would go in like 8-minute rotations, a good 3+ minutes rest in between each rep. And we got data for the entire team just off of 2 sprints. And really, you could just do it off of 1 sprint, but that's force velocity profiling. And in this next video, I have something that I put together for social media saying, can a sprint be better besides just being faster? And this is one of those instances where you get the confirmation from the graph how the athlete is running. So we want steep, narrow mountains, meaning that when they hit the ground, they create a lot of speed fast. So you have touchdown to toe off. If they're effectively propelling, if they have a lot of propulsion moving themselves forwards, then that graph goes up steep. So this athlete did a better job of getting their toes up in front. So consequently, their foot strike was more effective. And you can see at the end of this video that the graph was better. It was more steep. It was a little bit more narrow, meaning that even though the speeds were a little bit higher or the same, it was a better run. And for resisted sprints, one of the main things we do with it, and same thing with that Power 5 football team, is it helps guide our resisted sprints. And something that we've started doing is velocity decrement, right? Speed is distance over time. And velocity decrement, if you know what speed you want to run at, what percent slower, you know how far you want to run. Well, the only variable left to calculate is time. So we only have 1 1080 sprint, which is fine for testing and fine for smaller groups. And I can get up to 12 in a good training session on it. But we have sleds. And it's not that I was talking bad about sleds earlier. They're great because we have more of them. They're significantly cheaper. But we get insights from the 1080 sprint, the force velocity profiling. If I know that their speed over X yards, then I can calculate the different velocity decrements and how much time that should take. So for our high schoolers, for example, we have a rough estimate that a 10-yard sprint, about 2 seconds. So 50% velocity decrement should take twice as long. So 4 seconds. And here I have a chart of the different position groups and the different time goals if you want certain distances and certain velocity decrements and the averages. So basically, you can have a bunch of athletes going at once. If you have your skills, you say, hey, this should take you 4.7 or a little bit under 4 seconds. Your mid skills, hey, this should take you right about 5 seconds at 4.9. And your bigs, this should take you a tad over 5 seconds at 5.09 or 5.1. And then every athlete is getting what they need, and you just adjust the sleds accordingly to get them at that time goal. And next, you can use this resistance for drills because it's smooth, repeatable, and you can get super heavy with it. You can use it for jumps, both vertically and horizontally. Broad jumps, we found a lot of value in, and just being able to give a consistent, repeatable, trackable overload, right? It's not a band as the band goes light to heavy as it stretches. So it's a lot smoother and you can get a lot better reps and training with using the 1080 sprint for broad jumps, but also you can do it with single leg broad jumps, which is super interesting that you can get a little bit more granular and a little bit more deep in your assessments than simply just a single leg broad jump. And then you just compare the distances. So in this first video, one of the marketing videos that I shot for 1080 Motion was a rehab physical therapy clinic, and they have an eye hook in the ground to the 1080 sprint, and the athlete is on a box, or they could just be standing above the eye hook to get the line of pull vertical. and they're just landing and doing jumping. So you can overload the eccentric of the jump as well as the concentric. In this next drill, I have an athlete doing a resisted bound. So again, it's a drill, and we can do this with a variety of resistance, whether it's sleds, chains, rocket, but it's so smooth, it's so repeatable. When I say we're doing 8 kilograms 1 week to the next, we are doing that. And I don't know if I happen to track this rep or not on the machine, which you can give feedback like that, but it's just super nice resistance. And next we have the broad jumps. So this was our NFL combine training group. And literally I'd walk next to the athlete as they did, 3 to 5 reps, however many the set called for. And I would say, as the data came back to me live, their power, velocity, force, you could simply just do the speed and say 3.1, 3.05, and you're giving them that feedback, or just higher or lower if you want to keep it simple, and that draws out more intent. It's more effective stimulus. You get to track it over time. So it's really just a win-win-win. And another example of the single leg broad jump, or one of the ones that I think is the most interesting, we had an athlete this past year, played a whole season on a not fully recovered ACL, we'll call it. We get them on the 1080 sprint, and they're injured, or ACL side is 30% lower on their output on single leg jumps. Now, of course, we could see that while they were running and stuff like that, but it's super interesting just to get objective data that you can also track over time, right? Because like I said, it's a pre, during, and post assessment. So this is something that you couldn't do otherwise, but I think an interesting little case study or example of the insights that you can get that is more than just a single leg broad jump for distance. Assisted sprinting, assisted drills, again, the quality of the assistance. It's super repeatable and it's super safe. Whether it's bungees pulling you forwards that could snap, whether it's someone running the other way with those pulley systems that I've seen before, the string of the 1080 wraps in itself in the spool so it doesn't get in the athlete's way while they're actually running. And the assistance, you can do it with drills. So whether it's an assisted dribble, whether it's a straight leg bound, there's a lot of things that an athlete has to do well to, how I describe it, run with the assistance, not fight it, to accumulate some speed. So I think it's great just as a teaching tool. I'll do it with some younger athletes, and by younger, I mean a higher level middle school athlete, put it on the lightest assistance possible, and just see if they can run with it, if they can be effective, right? If they want to have any sort of speed. And then also just the sprints in and of itself, the quality of stimulus that they can achieve speeds faster than what they could otherwise. Their body feels how quick they have to get up in front and what that actually feels like, and also know that they can do it. And also the data that you can get along with it, that you can say down to the 100th of a meter per second, faster or slower or same as I ask my athletes. In this first video, just a regular assisted sprint. I might or might not have tracked this one. We'll see in the video. In this second video, we have a straight leg bound assisted. And this was the marketing video I shot for 1080 Motion and Chris Corfist. And if you want to see a mad scientist at work, go watch that video. He did overspeed bunny hops, overspeed single leg cycles. And there's just so many things that you can do and apply to challenge an athlete's ability to run well and also run fast. And in this last video, I have an athlete doing an assisted dribble into a sprint, right? So I want them to get into that right technique, that right rhythm before, with a little bit of assistance, and can they keep that going while they actually sprint? So it's a super good stimulus. It teaches athletes to do stuff well almost because they have to, and is by far one of the safest, in my opinion, and repeatable ways to do assisted sprinting and drills. Next, deceleration. Now, I think that this is one of the most underused or biggest potential uses of the 1080 sprint. And I think it's awesome for, tissue preparation or GPP, whatever you want to call it, as you can overload the athlete's deceleration muscles, which I'll show in the next video slide. And also the data that you can track on it, which I think is the most underutilized used / most potential, where you can track an athlete's ability to decelerate and come back out of that deceleration. And the visuals will do this justice. So in these first two videos, I have athletes simply doing a 7-yard run and stop. I think I bumped it up to 7 kilograms. We worked our way back from 5 yards to 7 and up from like 3 kilograms up to 7. And although deceleration isn't about deceleration itself, you have to decelerate and then re-accelerate somewhere else. But in regards to early off season, getting ready for the volume of training camp, in this case for the CFL and USFL, the ability to get a few more contacts in of that deceleration, but also a little bit more high intensity decelerations, I think is super valuable in preparing an athlete for the demands of sport. And in this third video, I have an athlete actually decelerating into a re-acceleration. So this was a running back, hence why he's holding a football. He sprints forwards 5 yards, puts his foot on the line, does almost like a step back, kind of like a step back jumper, but a step back 1 or 2 steps, and then just finishes out the rep. I think the machine pulled him like 2 more yards after that. But the ability to decelerate, re-accelerate backwards, and then get on just like if he was doing like a cut, trying to make someone miss. And in this last video, same guy, we can actually track like a single leg step back where you jump in, jump out on one leg. So left, I think we were 7 kilograms, 4 feet or 4 of my shoes away, starting on his left foot, jumping to his right foot 4 feet in, and then jumping back out off of his right foot to his left foot, if that makes sense. And you can track not only the eccentric, right? So how fast he was going into it, but also the concentric, how fast he was coming out to it. And again, this is just my experiments. I don't have anything official yet. I've tried to figure out, do you go concentric, speed or force divided by the eccentric, how well do they do that? But you can track almost anything your heart desires. Next, you can do the same thing with the one-step decelerations, if that's what we want to call it, with lateral movements or a lateral bound, lateral broad jump. I've heard it called a few different things, but basically jumping from your left leg to your right leg as far as you can with the assistance coming from your left hip. So you're going against the resistance. Again, super smooth, super high quality. You get to track it and you can do things. I've seen Justin Ochoa, super good guy in the basketball space, do resisted shuffles, and you can track that as well. But here's the video of just the athlete. Same thing with the broad jumps. I'm next to him, giving him feedback per rep of his output of whatever metric I decided to give him that day. But again, it just gets a little bit more effort, output, and consequently stimulus, and you can track it over time. You can compare left versus right. And this is a use that I found a lot of value in those sports like baseball and hockey. Experiments. So trial and error. Do this on yourself first. The example I always give was I came back from 2 years at TCU for grad school, and I walk in the facility where I was an intern and a part-time coach the 3 summers prior. And I said, oh my gosh, we have a 1080 sprint. I've only seen this on social media. How the heck am I ever going to learn this thing? And I literally just did 3 workouts on my own. Just someone gave me a quick crash course on what buttons to push and what they all mean. And I felt super comfortable and competent, not necessarily that I knew everything about it, but just how to run it. And really, the sky is the limit on your experiments and what you want to try to discover with this. Like I said, deceleration, I think, is super interesting, but just the variety of drills, stimuli, and data that you can track from it, do it on yourself first, whatever makes sense, what you think has some potential, and then go and do it because the 1080 sprint can do it. Pick a protocol and go with it. For example, our low velocity profile protocols, our force velocity protocols have been works in progress and have had 2 to 5 iterations each over the last 3 years. So my deceleration testing, right? I did 5 feet or 5 of my feet away on 3 kilograms, and then I put it 4 feet away for 7. And I just picked 3 and 7 because 1 or 2, there's still some slack in it. So you want enough resistance or assistance to kind of keep the string taut. And 7, just 10 is too heavy and 7 is a decent jump. And I felt like 5 was too similar. And I did it on myself. I got my feedback from my athletes. And that's this process of figuring out your protocols for 1080 sprint. And there's so many other things that you can do in that 1080 sprint rehab facility out in Oregon. And yes, I say it like that, mostly to annoy people, but that's how I was taught to say it. That video, they had a lot of super interesting uses for it, not only with the vertical jumping and the eye hooks, which we've talked about doing here, which I think would be super interesting, but they also tracked explosive rows, punches. You can do a rotation, like an anti-rotation. Well, it wouldn't be anti-rotation, but like a Palloff quick rotation. So literally anything you can put your mind to, this thing can track eccentrically, concentrically. You can get a ton of resistance, assistance. And last, just addressing some of the main concerns. So for big groups, to get athletes in testing wise, I've had with that Power 5 football team, I've had groups of up to 12 or 13 getting 2 reps each. And of course, the rest gets a little bit long where, you would typically do 3 to 4 minutes. This gets up 5, 6, 7. But if you think, or you can jack the pullback speed so the athlete runs 30 minutes or 30 minutes. The athlete runs 30 yards away. They undo the belt. It shoots back as fast as you want it to, up to 14 meters per second. If the next guy is up, they quickly grab it, put it on. They put their hand up for their 40. You hit start, you say ready, they take off. So it can be as quick as you want it to be, as opposed to something like a run rocket where you have to wait for the athlete to walk back, take the belt off, and give it to the next guy. And in actual training itself, now you have to do, and this is a topic for a different episode, let me know if you want to hear this, where I can get up to 12 athletes and you do basically circuits or supersets, if that word makes more sense, where you're pairing 1 or 2 exercises with the 1080 itself. Because I always say, just because it's the thing or it's the main thing you're doing doesn't mean it has to be the only thing. So there are ways to use the 1080 sprint with bigger groups. Now, that's not to say you can have one for 60 athletes and be like, Coach Matt, Coach Buteau, why doesn't this work? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying more than you would think, and it takes some creativity. But I think that you would be surprised at how many athletes you actually can get through at one time. And the portability, so the 1080 Sprint 2, I saw the world premiere. It was epic. Everyone lost their minds. A battery-powered, smaller, portable, you can fly with it on a plane. Not to give all the specs away. I should have a video about that on my YouTube as well. But, and it's a little bit cheaper as well. So 1080 Motion has been killing it with listening to their customers and trying to address some of their issues, if that's the word that I want to use. But big groups and portability, there are solutions for that. So action items. So it doesn't matter if you have a 1080 sprint or not, at least at this point, right? Because it is simply just a piece of machinery and a string that can provide resistance and assistance, and a tablet that can track it all, right? My boss was in business for 20 plus years before he bought the 1080 Sprint. And for the record, whenever I make content about the 1080 Sprint, I always say, for context, I didn't cut the check for it. I know that it's a big amount, but super grateful that he did. But you still have to pick the experiments, right? You still have to dial in those protocols. You still have to do pick the sets, the reps, the distances, the velocity decrements for your resisted sprints, and you have to coach with it, right? If it was as simple as buying one, turning it on, and just the athlete going and living their best life, right? They wouldn't need you. Tenny would be making a lot more money if it was that simple, right? So you still have to put 2 and 2 together, but learning what it can do, and there's not much that it can't do, at least in the context of how I'm describing it in this episode, you have to have somewhat of an idea, at least going into it, right? I don't think it would be wise to buy one and be like, oh, I'll figure it out once I get it. It's just a cool piece of technology, right? If you're not a facility or a coach where sprinting is your thing, if you're not one who is open to trial and error and learning and evolving your process, not that that's a bad thing, but some people, they're good at what they do, they crush it, and they want to stay in their lane. So understanding what it can do, almost everything that it can do, at least that I've been able to come up with in 3 years. Like I said, I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. Now you have a little bit better understanding of what it can and can't do. And not really can't, just what I haven't and others haven't discovered yet. But you can start getting your brain going on how you would use it, the gaps or areas that it would fill in your coaching, as well as the value that it would provide you and your athletes, and if it makes sense to you or not. Now, I think it's an awesome piece of technology, but it's not for everyone. Like I said, it has to make sense. So hopefully I did a good job explaining a variety of the uses. If you enjoyed, please give this a like, hit that subscribe button, follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Coach Big Toe. You can reach me in the comments. You can reach me by DMs. I love talking good stuff with good coaches. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and happy training.